One of the things that I really appreciated about you was your openness. You've spoken about this a number of times, your openness about your own, sometimes negative, castigating inner monologue. It's something that I'm incredibly familiar with as well myself. What would you say to the people who have poor self-talk, a scolding inner voice that reminds them of how they fell short way too often? What have you learned about dealing with that, and also about balancing that with your high standards for yourself, about wanting to make a mark in the world, but also needing to be able to give yourself self-love?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know that I could provide generic advice on the topic because it probably depends on where the person is in pain right now. So I know that for me, the message, the reason I was willing to engage in the discussion around changing the behavior was because the output of it was made clear to me, right? So once I recognized the link between my self-talk and my rage, and I fully accepted the fact that I wanted to rid myself of rage, then I accepted the fact that I had to go and fix the self-talk. So my guess is the only way to really try to convince somebody that you're having an inner Bobby Knight, which is what my guy was, having an inner Bobby Knight that screams at you all the time is harmful, is by helping them understand a clear path between how that behavior links to something that is hurting them in another way that is more obvious. And I think if you can't do that, it's probably a little too abstract to just say, you should be nicer to yourself.
I listened on recommendation from a friend to a 20-year-old, nearly 20-year-old Tony Robbins Awaken the Giant Within workbook on Audible. It's about an hour and a half, and I'd never read the original book. And in it, he talks about pain pleasure principle, and he talks about bringing, with decisions that you want to make or with habits that you want to change, bringing as much pain to bear. Look at what this has cost me in the past. Look at what this is costing me now. Think about what this will cost me in the future, and then turn that up to 1,000. So my friend wanted to stop biting his nails. So he thought about all of the times in the past that girls had sort of made an icky sort of move when he put his hands on it and they'd seen them, and how ashamed he felt about it at the time, and about how this was going to hold him back in the future, and how it made him feel like a juvenile and it was immature. And then he went online to turn it up to 1,000, and he looked at the worst photos that he could find of people that had bitten their nail, these awful, like bloody stumps of fingers. And then he thought about the opposite. He thought about how much pleasure could I bring to this, how proud I would be if I'd overcome this thing that I'd done for 20 years, about how much more attractive I would feel, about how much more confident I would feel when I shake someone's hand or I put my hand on my girlfriend's leg, and these sorts of things. And I have to say, it's incredibly powerful, like to do that, to bring to bear. And what you're talking about is there is a inner tormentor that kind of does a thing, but it's all inside of your head, and it's upstream from some things that actually manifest that you can kind of hold on to and do a thing. So how do you get back up, and how do you point the finger at what's actually going on? Well, you bring to bear so much of what's happening in the real world. But yeah, I think this is one of the most common issues, especially people that listen to this sort of a podcast. The high achievers, they want to do things, they want to leave a mark on the world, they want to improve themselves. But so much of that comes from like whipping themselves into submission all the time. I'm going to castigate myself until I like bow under the strain of how much torment I've given to myself.
But as you know, there's a real myth that you have to do that to perform well, right? And the myth is that, there are plenty of great coaches who extract remarkable performance from their athletes without that behavior. So, and it doesn't mean you're not firm, and it doesn't mean you don't have high standards, and it doesn't mean that if the team absolutely shits the bed and doesn't show up, that the coach isn't going to let them have it. But that's very different from the constant berating. And also, I think there's just a real difference in terms of, differentiating kind of a negative behavior or a negative outcome from the individual themselves is the problem, right? So it's one thing to say, I don't like that I wasn't able to do X, Y, and Z. That's a different statement from I am a worthless person because I didn't do
It's
A,
a
B, and
comment
C.
on my self-worth, on
Yeah.
how much respect I am owed by the world. Okay, so take me through how you reprogrammed that self-talk. I understand that you can have this thing, the rage is downstream from the whatever, but what did that look like? What did going in and fact-checking your very stern inner voice look like?
It was actually a very deliberate set of actions, because I think you have to do actions, and the easiest way to reprogram is through voice. So I think you have to audibly reprogram a system. I don't think thoughts are enough. And so the exercise that I undertook about 4 years ago to reverse a pattern of behavior that was in place for more than 40 years was to every single time I had a moment of what was about to amount in a sort of self-cursing situation, I was instructed to take out my phone and record audibly a description of what I would say to a friend had they just committed the same quote unquote egregious act. Okay, so example would be if I'm shooting my bow and arrow and I'm really doing a lousy job of it, instead of jumping into self-loathing, I would take out my phone and record a memo speaking, but not to myself, but to my friend. You know, like if it was you, what if you had just shot as poorly as I did? What would I say to you? And I would be much more gentle.
What were the sort of things that you would say?
It would be, you know, and again, you have to understand how strained some of these discussions are, because in the moment you're so angry,
Yep.
right? It would be, hey, Chris, I know you just finished trying to shoot today and it just didn't go well at all. You weren't able to accomplish any of the things you wanted to accomplish. I know it's frustrating. I think you just have to accept a couple of things. One is you're probably a little distracted today, if you're being honest with yourself, because you have a lot on your mind. And, you know, truthfully, it's a little windy today. And it's just hard for those arrows to fly straight when the wind is blowing at 10 miles an hour. And, you know, as you know from previous experiences, like tomorrow will be a new day. Like you're going to come out here and do this again tomorrow and it'll be better. And we're just going to go back to process and we're going to get it right. And we're going to do a couple of drills tomorrow to instill that. That was it. You know, it might be a 1-minute little voice memo. I'd send that to my therapist. And then, I don't know, 5 hours later, something else would come up that would piss me off. I'd burn a steak or something because I got distracted and left the barbecue. And inside I'd want to immediately eviscerate myself. But instead I would pull it out and pretend that it was my brother who had just burned the steak. And what would I say to him if we were at his house and he had just burned the steak? How would I make him feel better about it while acknowledging that it sucks? We don't have dinner tonight, you know? And I would do that. And after 4 to 6 months of doing this, I don't know, 3 to 5 times a day, lo and behold, I couldn't hear Bobby Knight talk anymore.
Wow. So it really turned the volume down?
It is, in my life, the single greatest example of neuroplasticity that I have ever witnessed.
And how old are you? How old were you when you were doing this?
I'm 51 now, so 47.
Dude, that's wild.
Yeah, you wouldn't think it could change.
I think especially when you're talking about self-talk, it is the internal physics of your system. It literally is the texture through which you interact with your own mind. And it's the fish underwater thing. Like you don't know that it could be different. And to think that it's as malleable as that. And how sticky has that been? Do you need to drop back? Are you having to go back and do this? Or is...
No, I've never had to go back and do it. And I've never heard the voice again. Now, I want to be clear. This doesn't mean I don't get angry. What it means is, A, the frequency with which I get angry is a fraction of what it used to be. And the duration or the blast radius is much narrower. So the last time I got really pissed at myself or pissed at my inability to do something was I was in the simulator. I'm trying to learn a new F1 circuit in the simulator. And for whatever reason, there are certain tracks that are just very hard. Silverstone is a very hard track to drive. It's very hard to put a perfect lap together, and it just really gets under your skin. And so is Imola. So Imola is a circuit I'm learning right now, like learning in great detail, right? Like I want to come up with a really cracking time on Imola. And I was down in the simulator and I was going through it, and I just couldn't nail the second and third last corners. And I would have these epic flying laps, and then I would absolutely shit the bed in this corner and either off track, spin, or just lose so much time that I couldn't put a lap together. And, after, I don't know, an hour of this, I just got super frustrated, got out of the simulator, and was like absolutely ripping pissed off. But because I didn't indulge in any self-talk, it wasn't like, you suck, how can you not do this, which is exactly what that voice would have said in the past. It was just, oh, I am so pissed that I am not able to do this right now. Like, I'm going to come and do it tomorrow. And by the time I got from my simulator room upstairs, I had forgotten about it. And that's the difference. Whereas before, that would have stayed with me. And I'm embarrassed to say this, it would have stayed with me for the rest of the day. I would not have been able to shed that anger for the rest of the day, and it would have leaked into everything I did. Whereas now, in 60 seconds, it's not that I didn't remember it happened. It just, the emotion of it had dissipated already.
So I can imagine there's a number of people whose inner voice perhaps isn't as pharmaceutical grade as yours was, or weapons grade maybe. But presumably that means that if they were to go through a period of this rewiring, that dose could be less, intensity would be less, difficulty would be less. Like if you're patient zero for having a really, really bad inner voice, that means that people who just want to make it a little bit better because it's a bit bad should be able to get there. Have you got any idea what was happening when you're going through it? Like, what is it about speaking to the friend? What is it about that increase of distance? What is it about the saying it out loud? And
yeah, I've never really thought about what's happening from a neurobiological perspective. It would be an interesting discussion to have with someone who's smarter than I am, and or at least understands that more. But it is, again, I didn't do this because I thought it would work. I really was like, this is kind of a dumb idea. There's no way this is going to work. And I'm going to just be doing this for the rest of my life. And maybe the fact that I have to do this for the rest of my life is the penance, like for my sins. But I was like, it can't work. Like, again, I just thought like it's so ridiculous that I'm going to do this because like what is the next thing you're going to tell me? I can be a foot taller if I think about it every day. Like if I talk to myself, I'm going to make myself taller. Like I thought that this trait was as immutable as a physical trait.
Yeah. In other news, this episode is brought to you by Element. Stop having coffee first thing in the morning. Your adenosine system that caffeine acts on isn't even active for the first 90 minutes of the day, but your adrenal system is, and salt acts on your adrenal system. Element contains a science-backed electrolyte ratio of sodium, potassium, and magnesium that helps to regulate appetite, curb cravings, and improve your brain function. You've probably heard me talk about it a million times, and that's because I love it. It tastes fantastic. It's got zero sugar, no junk, no colors, no artificial ingredients, or any other BS, and it's how I start every single morning. Best of all, there's a no BS, no questions asked refund policy with an unlimited duration, so you can buy it 100% risk-free. If you don't like it for any reason, they will give you your money back, and you don't even need to return the box. That's how confident they are that you'll love it. Right now, you can get a free sample pack of all 8 flavors with your first box by going to the link in the show notes below or heading to drinklmnt.com/modernwisdom. That's drinklmnt.com/modernwisdom.